Over the course of the last 59 episodes, I've covered everything from war heroes to bank robbers to war criminals and Nazis and just some of the worst people that you could ever imagine. And now we find ourselves at episode 60 with a topic that I've been fascinated with since I was a little kid. And full disclosure, I started writing this episode originally before my old show even started in 2018. So this has been a long time coming. I've had to narrow down a lot of information because if I didn't, we'd be here for days. My script was originally 35 pages long at 10-point font. So do the math. It was like 28,000 words, somewhere in there. But I've narrowed it down for all of our sake. And nothing that I have done up until this point on this show could have prepared me for the volume of sheer what the this guy did. And I think now's the time to really talk about it. My name's Kevin. The next couple weeks, we're going to be talking about Vlad the Impaler, and this is History Goon. So yeah, it's that Vlad. Vlad III, Vlad Dracula, his given name, Vlad Tepes, whatever you want to call him. We're going to talk about his early life, his military career, and his times, multiple times, on the throne of Wallachia. And then we're going to talk about his later life, obviously. And because I have to, because it's near and dear to my heart, we have to talk about everything that he inspired after his death, too. So the best thing to do to start this is to do a little bit of world building. It's going to be very Game of Thronesy for a bit here. Because as dramatic as that show is with all the political backstabbing and fighting for the throne, it's got nothing on Wallachia in the 13th century. And we have to build that world so that we can see the kind of life that he crawled out of to become who he became. Because he wasn't, maybe he wasn't just born a sociopath, maybe he was made one. Let's find out together, shall we? So let's picture a map of Europe around the year 1430. If you can't, I'll put one right there. The Ottoman Empire is eating its way across the Middle East and into southern Europe like an uncontrolled wildfire with a banner attached to it. The Kingdom of Hungary is trying to hold the line. And wedged directly between these two heavyweights on the world stage, kind of like a toddler standing in between Mike Tyson and Evander Holyfield, we have the Kingdom of Wallachia. It's a tiny principality in what's now southern Romania. If you wanted to design a piece of real estate specifically engineered to be invaded and conquered and set on fire on a regular basis, it would be called Poland. Or, in our case, Wallachia. This is basically southern Poland, with the amount of times that Wallachia has been stomped out from every direction. Kind of wild. There's a lot of similarities between the two. And obviously, it's not a very stable place, because this is constantly happening. Let's go back to the 1420s. The ruling house of Basra has already split into two permanently warring branches. We have the House of Dynasty on one side, and the House of Dracul on the other side. Vlad comes from the second one, hence what we're going to get into. Wallachia technically ran on an elective system where a council of aristocrats called boyars would supposedly choose the next prince in an election based on who would be best for the country. But it was usually based on who showed up with the biggest army and had the most useful foreign backing behind it. So it's an election in name only. Huh. As an American, I can relate to that. So for a full century before our guy is even born, these two families traded the throne back and forth, each new prince installed and deposed depending on which empire found him useful that particular decade, year, month, week, day, hour. Some of these rulers' lifetimes spanned anywhere from a few months to the amount of time that a box of Funny Bones lasts in my house after they've been in the freezer, which is days. So you're not getting a retirement plan as the Prince of Wallachia. The country itself didn't even have a fixed capital for most of this period. The old princely seat was in Cruta de Argis, which I know I mispronounced that. Spoiler alert, I'm going to mispronounce everything in this episode. So just wanted to be open and honest with everyone because unfortunately my Romanian is very rusty because I don't speak it at all. But this was the seat for generations before the court gradually shifted north to Targovist, which became effectively becomes the primary capital of the country by the time that Vlad's in his reign. And it's basically going to be the stage for every major set piece in this entire episode and series. So we're talking about a country that couldn't keep its capital in one place for 100 years straight. It's never going to be an easy thing to rule through anything other than fear. And Vlad, whatever you want to say about him, understood the math of that better than anyone who had had the job before him. His father, Vlad II, picked up the name Dracul after being inducted into the Order of the Dragon, which is a chivalric order founded in 1408 by Sigismund of Luxembourg. He was the Holy Roman Emperor and the King of Hungary at the same time. And that kind of binds this region's Christian nobility together against Ottoman expansion. And the name Dracul means both dragon and devil in Old Romanian. Medieval Romanian apparently didn't believe in doing anything in halves. So Dad's out here rocking the whole Dragon Knight Crusader vibe, playing one of the most dangerous geopolitical games of Twister in Europe. We have one foot on red, which is becoming a loyal Ottoman vassal state, and one foot on green as a sworn defender of Christendom. And nobody anywhere, including Wallachia, is buying the performance that he's putting forward for either of these positions. So before Vlad III has even been born, he's already lost the throne once to a Hungarian-backed dynasty rival, who was one of his cousins, by the way. And this happened after the King of Hungary, John Hunyadi, defeated the Ottomans and installed Climont as the Prince of Wallachia. And this forces Vlad and his whole family to flee. He would eventually get it back a year later by signing a new loyalty treaty with the Sultan of the Ottoman Empire. And this treaty specifically required him to send a set number of boys from Wallachian nobility to the Ottoman Empire as hostages. So if you really look at what I just said, in just a couple of sentences there's a lot going on. And that's going to continue for a while. It's kind of worth sitting with to see just how normal all of this was by 1440 standards, where you have two empires using a small buffer country's own princes as currency, basically. And you have the domestic aristocracy of that country that's backing whatever side is politically convenient for them. And they could do this by removing princes, installing new people, basically whatever they want to do. Nobody in this story is like a shining beacon of stability in the area. Now, our boy Vlad III is born into this mess somewhere around 1431, most likely in an area called Sigasoria, Transylvania, in a house that still stands today. It's somewhat of a tourist trap. I would go check it out because I love stuff like that. You can actually eat dinner in the room that he was born in. And whether you find that cool or a little deranged, considering who it is, kind of depends on your view of history. I would be fascinated to go to this house and sit in the room and eat whatever assortment of sausage, potato, and cabbage-based dishes that they serve there. Because again, sausage, potato, and cabbages are like three of my favorite food groups. And I know that's not how the food pyramid works, but I also don't care. European food is odd, but I love it. Like a lot of it is just a mishmash of shit that they've thrown onto a plate, and it's usually pretty good. So he is the second son born to Vlad II, which is odd because the first one would usually be the one to carry on the name, but that's okay. His older brother, Mircea, was born ahead of him, is next in line for succession. Then he has a younger brother named Radu, who becomes one of the most interesting subplots in this entire story. And to be honest, one of the more interesting ones in all of medieval history. And the other part that's kind of interesting here is the name Dracul is not passed down to Mircea or Radu. It's passed down to Vlad. And his son becomes Draculia, son of the dragon or son of the devil, which in hindsight it tracks, you know. In 1442, as part of the Loyalist Treaty, Dad hands his two youngest sons over to the Ottoman court as living collateral. Vlad's around 11 years old when this happened. Radu's like 7 or 8. We're not real sure because we don't really know how much of an age gap there was between them. It's, anywhere between 4 and 6 years. So that area kind of makes sense. This isn't like a school field trip. It's Dad handing his kids over as insurance to make sure that he is behaving correctly in the eyes of the Ottomans. If Vlad II steps out of line with the Sultan, he's not going to pay for it directly. His kids are. Interesting arrangement. It'd be like getting turned over to your dad's boss and your dad screwing up at work and then the boss coming home and like putting belt ass with you because your dad didn't get his reports in on time or messed up a part or whatever line of work your dad's in. He didn't frame this right. And then, boss comes home and puts steel toes up your ass. So when you think of hostages and this time period together, you don't think of what it actually is. You're probably picturing torture, chains, rats, stuff like that. The real version is a lot more interesting, like we talked about with Arminius, where he was sent off to the Romans as a hostage. And when the child of nobility is sent as a hostage, they are treated pretty well. They're fed regularly. They're educated in a bunch of different things other than like reading and writing. They're being taught how to do that. They're also being taught military tactics, and they're learning how the country that owns them at the moment does business. And that's all going to come in handy for our buddy Vlad here in a little bit. And all of this took place at at the court of Sultan Murad II in Erdene, which was the Ottoman capital before they stole Constantinople and then turned it into Istanbul. But I'm not bitter about that. Vlad and Radu, at young ages, both learn Turkish, Arabic. They're learning horsemanship, archery, court etiquette, military tactics, things like that. The Ottomans ran a pretty slick operation with these hostage situations. They keep the kids comfortable enough so that they're not radicalized by cruelty, educated enough to be useful later. And they're always kind of dangling the fact that their well-being depends on Dad's behavior to keep the arrangement somewhat pleasant. So early on, right here is where our story kind of splits down the middle. We have Radu, who would become known as Radu the Handsome, when that's like an actual nickname. That's not like a AWA wrestler from the 70s that looks kind of foreign, so we have to make him a bad guy, but he's also good looking, He thrives in this. There's a Greek chronicler that was in the court at the time that was actually following around the future Sultan, Mehmed II. And he realized that Mehmed had a particular fondness for Vlad's younger brother. He described Radu as his, quote, favorite amongst the hostages of the court. And a lot of historians believe that this fondness went even further than any kind of politics or just fondness for this kid because he shows some potential. A lot of them think that there is an actual physical romantic relationship between Radu and Mehmed II. And not uncommon for the time frame, I guess. Not uncommon for the Ottomans, who have become like a perennial bad guy on this show, like right next to the communists. they're like 1 and 2 as to who I talk the most shit about on here for some reason. In the mix of all this, Radu converts to Islam, which is a no-no because, you know, of who his ancestors are and what his brother is going to do. He becomes a fixture of Mehmed's inner circle as he grows older. So he's not really feeling the same way about his time here that Vlad is, where Vlad hates every second of his time with the Ottomans. Radu is flourishing under them. Vlad does the training that's required of him because he's not stupid enough to ignore it and get killed for it. He never made peace with his captives. He never made friends with them. Never accepted like a father-son relationship with any of them like his brother has. Some accounts describe him as sullen, defiant, and difficult. He's basically the kid that doesn't play well with others, and he's showing that very clearly as he gets a little older. And this is important because this training that he's doing, he's going to weaponize in 20-ish years against the Turks and the Ottomans. And it's not just the military stuff that he's going to weaponize against him. It's his understanding of Ottoman military organization and tactics and horsemanship and all that, and how their political system works. He's going to use all of that against them and throw it back in their faces. The Ottoman Empire isn't holding 2 Wallachian boys hostage. It's building from scratch exactly the kind of enemy that would eventually give it the worst afternoon of the 15th century. Whatever specifically happened behind the closed gates of the palace, we don't really know all of it. What we do know is that it planted something in Vlad as a boy that never left him. And that is an undying hatred of the Ottomans. It's so strong that it's going to influence every decision he makes for the rest of his life, right up until the moment that he dies fighting them. So while the boys are cooling their heels in Ottoman custody, Dad's out here doing exactly what every Wallachian ruler has done for centuries, and that's picking the wrong side at the wrong moment. John Hunyadi, who's the Hungarian regent governor of Transylvania, and probably a future episode, if I'm being honest, because he's a really interesting dude. Not only is he the king of Hungary and essentially the king of Transylvania at this point in time, he's also legendary in the field of kicking the Ottomans' teeth in. He invades Wallachia while Vlad's older brother, Mircea, is spending his very brief period of time on the throne, and he removes Mircea and installs someone from the Dynasty tribe, the rivals to them. Then everything kind of falls apart in 1447 all at once. Vlad II and Mircea are both killed, and to take a second, this wasn't like a, just take him out back and shoot him. They took their time with these guys. So basically they took Vlad II outside and decapitated him with a sword or an axe or whatever. But since he wasn't running the country, he got a quick one. Mircea, on the other hand, didn't. He was blinded with red-hot iron stakes and then buried alive by the boyars themselves, the essentially Senate of this country in Targovist. These are the same nobles that are supposed to be serving the family that's on the throne. But because they're no longer useful, we're not serving them anymore. We're going to serve the ones that we're putting in instead. So by the time he's 16 years old, Vlad III has been through some shit. He's been handed over as a hostage by his father. He's been raised within the walls of his mortal enemy. And then he basically watched from captivity as his father is murdered and his brother is tortured and then murdered by these people that are supposed to be backing him. And just to throw a cherry on top of this shit sundae, his cousin Vladislav II was the one that was placed on the throne after his father and brother were killed. You don't really walk away from a childhood like that balanced or like mentally stable, I guess. And you don't necessarily gain the type of skills that you need in conflict resolution to come out of it normal. Everything that he becomes, like every stake, every atrocity, tracks back to this exact moment when he finds out how his father and brother were killed. So, how does basically a homeless teenager become a prince? I'm glad you asked, Kevin. The Ottomans put him there. In 1448, with Ottoman military backing, teenage Vlad marches into Wallachia and briefly grabs the throne while John Hunyadi is busy elsewhere fighting the Ottomans. His first reign as the Prince of Wallachia lasts about 2 months, 60 days, call it, before Hunyadi shows back up and kicks him out. So from here, he starts bouncing around to like other areas. He goes to Moldova for a while, under the protection of his uncle Bogdan, until, shockingly, Bogdan also gets assassinated. The life expectancy, if you're one of Vlad's male relatives, is somewhere between housefly and gas station roller dog. Yeah, a couple of days to a couple of months. From, the housefly lasting for a couple of days to the roller dogs being anywhere between 60 and 90 business days old by the time they throw them away. And eventually he does the single most Wallachia noble thing imaginable and switches sides. He goes to Hunyadi, the guy who has invaded his country multiple times, that's killed his father and brother, and basically says, hey man, water under the bridge. I hear you need a guy that knows his way around the Ottomans. And I just so happen to have spent a little bit of time with him myself. And because Hunyadi is not stupid, and he knows what this guy is going to be capable of in the future, says yes. Because this isn't a soap opera where he's going to hold some grudge against him for the rest of his life. He's not Vlad, after all. He says yes, go for it. It's not about who you hate, it's about who's useful that week. And this little alliance pays off in 1456. Vlad is now roughly 25 years old, takes the Wallachian throne for real this time, has his rival Vladislav killed in fighting. Some accounts say that he died in combat. Some accounts say that Vlad challenged him to a duel and killed him. And if that's true, that's a pretty intense way to start your resume as the leader of a country. So let's take a look at it from his perspective. You're 25 years old. You just took the throne that your family's blood is literally soaked in. And you know, personally, that the people that are responsible for the death of your entire family, basically, and the reason that you had to run around for a while and hide, are the boyars. What do? Do you forgive them? Do you politically depose them and replace them with other people? If you're Vlad, you throw a party to celebrate the whole thing. Sometime around Easter in 1457 or 1459, it might have even been 1458 for all we know, Vlad invites the boyars of Targovist to a party. Not just them. This is like one of those company picnics where you can bring your wife, your kids, you bring the whole family. It's going to be a great day. We've got a water slide. It's already set up out in the woods. I'll show you where it is. Everybody's dressed up in their finest because it's almost Easter after all, and you have to be dress nice if you're going to, going to Easter dinner. And it's a really good time. People are partying, people are dancing, there's laughter, there's food, maybe there's cake. We don't know. Everything's going great. Until it isn't. And according to the oldest surviving Romanian chronicle of the entire situation here, while the citizens are feasting and the younger ones are out dancing, Vlad has his personal bodyguards surround them. He asked the old boyars how many princes of Wallachia that they could remember serving in their lifetimes. And these men who have watched rulers come and go for decades, and because they were the ones that made them go for the most part, start bragging about it and trying to one-up each other, which was the exact answer that Vlad wanted. He said something along the lines of, "You people are the reason that none of these rulers, including my family, got to keep their job." The older boyars, somewhere between 200 and 300 people, and their families, were impaled on the spot. We're going to come back to the impaling, because I've got really, really good details about what happens when you're impaled. And it's not great. It's going to add to my Google AI review of why people don't like the show, because I go into graphic detail on things, which is part of the reason that I do the show in the first place, because history's gross, and you need to know about all the gross stuff. Not just like, oh, they dragged these people off and impaled them. What actually happens when you stick a sharpened metal pole into somebody and then stand it up in the air? Let's find out in a little bit. The younger, healthier people that weren't impaled, including women and children, were force-marched over 50 miles from Targovice to a ruined fortress above the Argas River, and if they stopped moving, they were whipped and beaten until they reached their destination. This is like medieval Bataan Death March, which we'll be talking about that at some point too. Good times out there in the Philippines. By the time they arrived, their like fancy, nice Easter clothes are in rags. And some of them are effectively naked because they've been marched through the woods, being torn at by bushes and branches wherever they go. And then Vlad puts them to work. Remember I told you we had a water slide? We have to build it first. Sorry. They basically assemble a human supply chain, and they pass stones and bricks and buckets of mortar hand to hand up a cliff face. And some of them are actually at the bottom of this whole thing baking bricks, because that's how bricks are made, is you make clay and then you have to bake it in a kiln, and then it's hard, and then you can use it for bricks. Thank you for coming to my TED Talk. A lot of them were dying on the spot from exhaustion, from falls, from the brutality of the labor itself. But what rises from the cliffside where this forced labor camp is Panari Castle. It's his personal stronghold, his eagle's nest, if you will. And it's built almost literally on the bones of the exact noble class that murdered his family. Today, the ruins sit atop a 1,480 step climb that tourists climb up to look at. And a lot of the people that make this climb, when they do reviews of it, they're like, oh, you basically go up there and it's rubble. I still want to see it because it's Dracula's castle. Okay? I still want to go. Anyway, to understand why that Easter afternoon was such effective statecraft and not just performance, you need to understand what a boyar actually was and why the system was broken to begin with. Boyars are basically like hereditary landowning aristocracy. So if we were to take this and move it to England, they'd be like dukes and earls, where they're the landowners. The people live on the land and work the land because that's how serfdom is. They're not quite like the feudal lords in Western Europe, but function pretty similarly. So they have enormous estates. They command their own private armies. And more importantly, they sat on the divan, the princely council, that in a properly functioning Wallachian government, which it never was supposed to advise the voivod, who is the prince, and to kind of like participate in choosing who became voivod in the first place. That's the whole elective monarchy thing that I talked about before. The boyars were the electorate. It's our electoral college, except I doubt people were bitching about it depending on who became president, if we need to keep the electoral college or get rid of it. Because it seems to fluctuate back and forth in the US, depending on how an election goes, whether it's like, whether the electoral college is the greatest thing that democracy has ever created, or if it's the worst thing because our guy didn't win. Our elections don't matter. It doesn't matter who the president is because the country is not run by the president anyway. It's run by foreign powers and special interest groups. And if you're an adult in the US and you can't see that and understand it, I don't know how to help you, because it doesn't matter who's in the White House, because we deal with the same bullshit either way, you know? So as long as the boyars held both the hereditary land and the formal king-making power, no Wallachian prince could ever consolidate enough power to run a stable country. This is exactly how Vlad's father lost the throne, and how his brother lost the throne, and how everybody for the past 100+ years before that had lost the throne. And after watching all of this happen as a kid, he kind of came to a conclusion. It's pretty coherent and kind of evil, but the conclusion that he comes to is that the hereditary boyar class itself was the disease, and the disease needs to be removed and not treated. They're a cancer, and if you don't remove the cancer, it will spread still. Or if you manage it, it could still spread anyway. So let's just get in there and cut it right out. Get rid of it. So just below the surface level horror of all this, there's some political genius going on here. Because this massacre worked. In one afternoon, he wiped out the entire hereditary boyar class, and he replaced it with a fully new aristocracy that historians would call the new men. They come from minor nobles and even some well-regarded commoners that are elevated to these new positions. So they are elevated to the point of being landowners. And Vlad was doing them a favor by elevating them. And this means that they had nowhere to go if he's kicked out. If he loses power, so do they. Because whoever the new guy is going to come back in and reinstall the old system. So their best interest is to keep him there as long as possible. And having this whole like favor-based system creates a lot less backstabbing because everybody's dependent on each other. It's, again, kind of evil, but it's one of the most effective political consolidations of power of the entire century. He didn't just get his revenge, he got infrastructure out of this as well. It doesn't fix the whole like underlying issue, because there is still a boyar clan in the western part of the country who by the century's end become a regional power in their own right, kind of independent rulers of an entire province of this little country that are wealthy enough to build churches. They're comfortable enough with the Ottomans to bring them in for things and to start using a little bit of the like Ottoman political system. And because they did all of this, they survived for decades. They survive Vlad. They survive Radu. They survive this entire thing untouched. And they continue like building power for decades and decades until eventually a member of their family, Nagoin Basrab, is sitting on the Wallachian throne outright, having toppled everything. Which kind of tells you something that's almost funny. Like, you can build your fortress on the bones of the people that killed your family, replace them as a complete wing of society, and then the same structural problem will just regrow under a different name within a couple of generations. So this isn't pulling weeds. This is hitting them at grass level with the weed whacker and wondering, why the hell do these things keep coming back? Why do I still have goldenrod? Because you didn't pull the roots up. That's why. Because you didn't get down there on your hands and knees and take care of the problem at the very root of it. That's why they come back. Vlad brought Wallachia a generation and a half, whatever, of centralized authority through pure terror. But he didn't fix the country. The country wasn't fixable because one man's paranoid and has an agenda. Now, with the noble class broken to a point that he's comfortable with, he turns on some of these Saxon merchant towns in Transylvania, like Barzov and Sibiu. These are German-speaking trading communities who had been backing his rival half of the family for a very long time. And they're not treating Wallachia as their homeland. They're treating it as a place where they can just extract profit from and then send it elsewhere, which is a huge mistake, because I'm not sure if you guys are familiar with this. Vlad Tepes is a maniac. Vlad launches a bunch of raids into Transylvania against these two towns. He burns outlying settlements and he impales merchants he catches breaking his trade terms or backing rivals. And this is where a lot of the surviving written records of his cruelty actually come from, because literate merchant communities write things down. When you have dirt farmers that are not educated enough to know how to read or write, they don't. And they're doing this because things aren't happening near them, they're happening to them. And they were horrifying enough that they wanted to try to warn the rest of Europe about it. German language pamphlets start circulating describing Vlad impaling merchants by the thousands, burning down entire settlements, boiling people alive, and nailing hats to skulls. These are all details that we'll get into later. One of the most famous images to survive from this exact period of conflict is a German woodcut from around 1499 that depicts Vlad calmly sitting at a dining table just outside of Barsov, eating. He's surrounded by a forest of stakes and their occupants, while an executioner methodically dismembers other victims just a short distance away in the background. It was basically like this was dinner and a show for him, is how they treated it. Whether or not that specific atrocity attributed to these raids happening as they are described, and the terror that he is forcing upon these people across Transylvania, we're not sure if it's fully historically accurate or if this is propaganda on bark, basically. And that kind of brings us to something important for the rest of this story. A huge amount of what we do know about Vlad's atrocities come from these Saxon pamphlets and Russian accounts written under some of the czars, and both of them have reasons to exaggerate this stuff. The Germans are kind of trying to nurse any political and economic grudges that they have. The Russians are using these stories as like a morality tale kind of propaganda thing about the necessity of a ruthless, centralized power that's put in the hands of one man. And there's not really enough consistency across these areas because they're all hostile to each other. Some are neutral, some are friendly. Then you mix in the letters that Vlad wrote himself, bragging about body counts, that the core of it is real, but the specific numbers and inflation of them is kind of up in the air. One of these stories that we have a lot of documentation for that still survives, it's got a lot of solid backing to it. At one point, an Ottoman envoy visits Vlad's court, and according to their custom, when he asks them to remove their head covers, because when you go to a court in Europe like that, you take your hat off. You take whatever off that's on your head, because that's just how they do things. The Ottomans don't want to follow that, because that's not their custom, and they're the power in the area after all. So why should we have to listen to you? So when you asked them to remove their turbans, they said no. Because the full removal of their turbans and head covers and stuff like that is something that they only had to do in the presence of their sultan. Vlad's response to this, very rational, very level-headed, said, if you won't remove them in front of me, you'll never remove them again. And he had their turbans nailed to their skulls. This is one of the most deranged things that a head of state has ever said out loud. um, Depending on how you want to look at how we do things now. But every act of violence in this story is kind of pulling double duty. It's punishment and it's also theater. So we're broadcasting a message as loudly as possible in the only language that traveled reliably across borders before print, and that's violence. Oh boy. Now here's the part where it kind of stops getting funny for a little bit, because we kind of need to be a little bit straighter about all this, because we're about to get into what impalement does to a human body. And impalement's nothing new. There's nothing new under the sun. This has been around for a long time. It shows up in some like reliefs that they found that date back as far as the Assyrians, which ironically enough was where the Ottoman Empire would come from. But what made Vlad different was the scale and the level of technical refinement to maximize the amount of suffering and also the visibility of this. So to impale somebody, you can Google this. So this isn't like me telling you how to build a nuclear reactor in your backyard, because that's illegal. You take a wooden stake and you sharpen it, or sometimes blunt it, depending. Then you either grease it or not. If you want to be merciful, you grease it up. But this is so that it could travel further through the body without tearing everything apart at once. Meaning that the longer you make this take, the more visible the death is. It's commonly inserted through the rectum or through the vagina for our females out there, our ladies, our girly listeners, just imagine that. And it's angled to travel upward through the torso between major organs rather than through them. And the goal here is to miss all of your major organs like your heart, your lungs, most of the major blood vessels and arteries. We don't want to hit those because we want you to stick around for a while. We want you to hang out for a bit. A quick death defeats the entire purpose of the act of impaling. Some accounts describe the tip deliberately being blunted rather than sharpened, because a sharp point kills too efficiently by slicing straight through everything, while a rounder tip, on the other hand, pushes the organs aside as it travels, which would cause catastrophic internal trauma without a large amount of blood loss. Again, ugh. So now that Vlad's got wood in you, the stake is raised vertically and planted into the ground, and we're going to let gravity do the rest. The victim's own weight slowly pulling them further and further down, millimeter by millimeter, hour by hour, onto this wooden stake. This is why the victims could survive for hours and sometimes days, screaming, visible from a mile away in some cases, before death would eventually come and take them from blood loss and organ failure. As all of this internal damage is compounded, then you also have shock and dehydration and exposure. Because most victims weren't tucked into like a private execution chamber, they're left outside on public display, most often right on the edge of the road, specifically to be seen from as far away as possible. This is why when Genghis Khan was going through Central Asia and Eastern Europe, they found mountains of skulls and bones that were 70, 80 feet high, because they wanted them to be seen from as far away as possible, so that some poor guy on a horse that's just trying to deliver grain season, he's like, what's that? Maybe I shouldn't go any further. I'm gonna turn around now and sell this closer to home. So just to like be clear about some things here, because it's easy for your brain to just glaze over all of this is just, regular medieval brutality, click next, whatever. The entire terrifying part of this method from like a tactical standpoint is that it's not really about killing one person on a stake. It's about the thousands of people who see or hear that people are on stakes. It's psychological warfare at its finest. A field of people slowly dying and screaming that's visible from that distance tells every enemy soldier approaching exactly what is waiting for them if they keep coming. And it tells them slower and louder and more permanently than any field of guys killed in combat could. There's a reason this genre of atrocity shows up again and again across military history, whether it's because of an outnumbered force needing to use terror instead of manpower. It's a brutal but recognizable category of like asymmetric warfare. It's the 15th century version of the same logic that shows up whenever a smaller force needs its opponent to believe that the cost of advancing is higher than any reports that are coming back from the front line. And it works. Specifically, it works against a professional Ottoman Empire, which we're going to get into. Almost makes me wonder if I need to do something maybe on Patreon, patreon.com/1159media, about some of the psychological warfare stuff that the U.S. did during the Vietnam War, where they'd, snatch a guy at the end of a Viet Cong patrol and kill him, and then jab holes in his neck and leave him tied to a tree somewhere and be like, it's the Aswang, or when they were hiding recorders in the trees of people screaming in Vietnamese to make it sound like ghosts in the woods to scare these guys off. Pretty cool. So some chroniclers at the time added some toppings to this. Some of the stories changed where you weren't being impaled through the anus or through the vagina. Just to, spice things up a little bit. There's stakes arranged in geometric patterns and different heights so that more important victims towered above the rest, the tallest stakes being reserved for whoever Vlad wanted an enemy commander to notice. Somewhere in this guy's brain, between the trauma and the paranoia and the calculation of all this, there's somewhat of a film director in there as well. He's basically creating a European summer blockbuster with an unlimited budget of human bodies and a very specific eye for how things need to be framed. And some of these other accounts are like, they're not just sticking a pole up somebody's ass and leaving them on the side of the road. Some of them, they're putting it directly through their stomach and then holding them with ropes as the stake goes up and just letting them very slowly come down on it. Or, hey, maybe some of them were impaling upside down through the mouth. If any of that's true, we don't really know. But I wouldn't be surprised if it was. And stakes weren't his only tool. Some surviving accounts from enemies, but they're consistent enough across different sources that we can take them seriously. Go into a lot of detail about flaying people alive, boiling people alive, decapitating people and putting their heads on stakes, which was a normal thing for the time. Hangings, burnings, blindings, stranglings, roasting people alive, hacking limbs off and letting people wander the streets, nailing people alive to trees, burning people alive, and then, just to calm everything down, just stabbing people to death. There's a specific kind of cruelty to some of these smaller stories that's possibly more frightening than the mass casualty half of it, because it shows that this isn't a guy that only turned violent on a large scale. This is interactional. So if you've upset him, man, that guy said something kind of mean to me, stab him. Or the waiter comes by and takes your plate too quickly. Well, you're still eating. I'd like to bake this guy alive in something. I can relate. In the middle of my meal and somebody tries to take my plate, I'm going to want to put him on a stick. One account describes him rounding up people who lied to him, having them dig their own graves, and then beheading them right there at the graveside that they've just finished digging, which is effective. It's efficient, if anything else. There's another story where a foreign merchant had his coin purse snatched in the capital, And Vlad had the thief tracked down and executed. The money was returned in full, plus an extra coin, specifically as a test. If you keep the extra coin without reporting the discrepancy, he's going to be executed too for being a thief and being dishonest. The merchant, for his own sake, reported it, and then he kept the coin. Which I think at that point, if you're like, hey man, you screwed up, you paid me too much, he'd be like, I did it on purpose. Keeping an eye on you, buddy. You keep it. Don't spend it all in one spot. I bet that guy never took that coin out of his pocket again. That just stayed there forever. And then there's the story of the gold cup. One of the more, I guess, fun of the entire saga. And it's still unhinged because we're still talking about Vlad. Vlad supposedly had a large golden cup placed near a public fountain in Targov East, available for anybody to use to drink from the fountain. And according to the legend, it sat there untouched for the rest of his reign because the punishment for stealing it or for committing basically any crime was going to be impalement. Nobody even touched the cup. Ever. Crime basically stopped under his rule. Merchants left their goods unattended overnight outside. Travelers walked the roads that used to be just crawling with bandits like Skyrim style. They walked the roads without worry. He solved petty theft in medieval Wallachia through pure, unadulterated, unfiltered fear. And it worked. It's almost like when you publicly execute people for committing crimes, crime drops. Interesting. I wonder how that would work with politicians, though. Anyway, but it's not all fun and games. We don't get to talk about all this fun stuff like that without talking about some of the less fun stuff that he did. He apparently had a number of poor and sick and elderly and disabled people in his realm. People he viewed as less of a humanitarian concern and more of a list of undesirable folks. And he invited all of them to a massive feast in a wooden hall in Targov East. Fed them all well. I'm sure you can see where this is going. Asked if they'd like to be free of poverty and hardship forever. And when they enthusiastically said, yes, my lord, I would love nothing more than that, he had the doors locked from the outside and burned the building to the ground with everyone inside. Later, he explained to the boyars that the problem of poverty in Wallachia had now been fully solved because there were only rich people left. So there's really no version of that story that's funny. Like, you can't really even make jokes about it because it's just horrible, you know? It's kind of one of the earliest documented instances in European history of a ruler treating poverty and the people that live in it as a public health problem to be solved rather than actually solved. Little eugenics, you know, it's kind of eugenicsy, but with Vlad's signature on it, which makes it even worse. So that's a strike against him, you know. It kind of plays against the folk hero thing that he's got going, no matter what anybody wants to tell you about his record. Most of what we know of him comes from a Russian source called, I'm not even going to try it in Russian, The Tale About Voivod Dracula, which is a collection of stories that were all compiled within like a decade of his death and copied across about 20 surviving manuscripts. And this story treats about half of all of this stuff. It all kind of points to him being like admirable and how he did everything with purity and heart more so than horror and being a maniac. And it kind of tells you something about how differently a 15th century audience was going to read about a story like this than how we would as modern people. But that's part of the problem with history is nowadays we look at everything through a modern lens where, like, for example, you could have some royalty that's in his 40s that marries a, 14-year-old girl, which by today's standards is disgusting, and I would never defend that. But if you look at it at the time, it was seen as normal. See, you kind of, there's a lot of gray areas with history. I think we've talked about that before with a lot of different things. That stuff that happened 500-600 years ago, you can't look at it through the modern lens the same way that you could if you look at it objectively from how things were at that time. You know? Because, like, yeah, back then, impaling people was normal. You impale somebody now, and you're going to be on every news channel across the country, even if it's just the one person, you know? By 1460, Vlad and Mehmed II are on a collision course. Mehmed wants tribute, and on top of the cash, he wants 500 children, presumably through that same or another very similar pipeline that Vlad himself was fed to him through. Vlad, who was that hostage, straight up refused to do this anymore. Then envoys arrived to collect the tribute anyway. This is where the turban incident came from. And by nailing the turbans to these guys' heads, he may as well have nailed a declaration of war directly to the outside of the gates of the Ottoman Empire. Mehmed sends a pretty well-known Ottoman naval officer named Hamza Bey, along with the Sultan's own Greek secretary, to negotiate. But he doesn't necessarily send the naval officer there to negotiate. These guys are sent there to either bring Vlad to heel, to get him under control and get him under the thumb of the Ottoman Empire, or to kill him. Vlad got wind of that plan and ambushes the entire escort at the border fortress of Gajiru, and he has the captured men led away to be impaled. Not before their limbs were cut off. Hamza Bey personally gets the tallest stake in the display, a marking of the highest honor, delivered in the cruelest possible way to these messengers of the Ottomans. Then, rather than sit behind his borders, Vlad crossed the Danube River that had frozen over in the dead of winter with his own army and rampages straight into Ottoman-controlled Bulgaria. In a letter to King Matthias Corvinus of Hungary, which is a crazy cool name. That sounds, oh my god. Matthias Corvinus sounds like a dude from Warhammer. That's great. This letter is dated February 1462. Vlad describes the campaign himself. Quote, I have killed men and women, old and young, who lived at Obletska and Novoselo. We killed 23,884 Turks and Bulgars, without counting those whom burned in their homes or whose heads were not cut off by our soldiers. He told that to an ally, and he undercounted, because the only ones that he actually counted are the ones that his guys killed, not the ones that they burned alive in their houses. The letter elsewhere describes the killing of women, and included the actual phrase, quote, slaughtered with swords and spears like cabbage. It's a harvest. It's not a massacre, in his own telling. And this wasn't a letter that was captured on its way to this guy. This was deliberately written to him, very formally, with like a lot of diplomatic inclusions in there, written directly by Vlad to demonstrate how much he dislikes the Ottomans. I think we can use the word hates the Ottomans at this point. And it also describes that since he's fluent in Turkish, because again, that's one of the languages he's learned when he was a hostage, he used a disguise at both of these cities to ride into the positions, and in perfect Turkish with the accent and everything, ordered the garrison commander to open the gates, and the commander complied because he didn't know any better. Once inside, the entire garrison is slaughtered. So all of that stuff, all of that education that the Ottomans gave him, this is the first time that he has used it against them. And the other thing to consider here is we didn't kill everyone in these towns, because Bulgarians that were Christians were spared. And a lot of them are resettled north of the Danube River, which is part of why Vlad is still like remembered with fondness and reverence in Bulgaria today, alongside like other people like his cousin Stephen the Great of Moldova, who was another Orthodox prince who had built the reputation of like a defender of Christianity and the populations that followed Christianity against Ottoman expansion. But the overall campaign, according to the Greek writer that was working for the Ottomans, involved, quote, completely destroying the inhabitants together with their women and children and setting fire to their houses, burning everything where they went. Along with the casualty letter, Vlad reportedly shipped Matthias physical proof in the form of severed ears and noses in case a king reading a 5-digit number needed anything more than the number to look at. Every action that he takes in his fighting is, again, pulling double duty on his war resume. And choosing winter to attack shows the kind of like tactical genius that he was in his own kind of terms, because the Danube freezes solid enough to march an army across without having to use boats, without a naval engagement, without giving Ottoman garrisons on the far bank like any kind of warning that there's a crossing even possible at that time of year. So unlike Napoleon or Hitler, Vlad weaponized winter in his favor to attack. And it wasn't a single raid. The campaign ranged across nearly 500 miles of Ottoman-controlled territory over the course of the entire winter, with garrison after garrison, town after town, all falling, until by the time everything wraps up, the area on the southern bank of the Danube River has been made basically uninhabitable and a really good staging ground for any kind of future invasion. So that's the landscape. It's burned, depopulated, poisoned, that Mehmed's massive spring invasion force is about to march into. And that right there is where we're going to end part 1 of this series. It's going to be at least another part. It might be a third. I'm not 100% sure. But that's part 1. That's the first half of Vlad the Impaler's life, and where he earned the nickname the Impaler. So I hope you enjoyed this. You know, don't you might not look at toothpicks the same again, but that's okay. If you want early access to this or any of the other stuff that I do on my end at History Goon, including my Patreon exclusive stuff, head over to patreon.com/1159media. $5 a month gets you early access and backdoor access to just about everything we've got there. You're looking at probably close to 100 hours of content a month for $5 across the entire range of our shows. I have a Ko-Fi also, ko-fi.com/historygoonpod. You can throw me some money there if you want. That's awesome. If you don't want to help me financially, you can help me by just spreading the word, telling other people about this, going over to my YouTube channel where you can watch the video and the shorts that I post. And I want to start doing something else. I want to start shouting out other shows that I personally listen to, because I think it might be things that other folks here are interested in that might not be part of the network. So this week I want to talk about a show called Crimes, Killers, Cults, and. Am I talking about this show because I have a particular interest in it because I co-host it? Maybe a little. Am I talking about it because you're going to get a lot of really good content? I mean, I think Bill's up over like 180 episodes at this point, covering serial killers, cults, weird stuff like that. And we have fun. We get to pick on not the victim, no. We pick on the perpetrator. And sometimes the inept police that unfortunately make a lot of that stuff possible by not doing their jobs well. But you can find that anywhere you find podcasts. It's Crimes, Killers, Cults, and. I believe he posts those every Sunday or Monday. Kind of fluctuates, I think, but we're in that time, that area. But yeah, we record that every week. We have a lot of fun. And if you're looking for some true crime stuff that's not part of the network, check it out. So, until we meet again with part 2 of Vlad, we're all going to die someday. Go out and do some goon shit and leave a mark in the world. Just like Vlad Tepes. Maybe not. Okay. Love you. Bye.